might be a bit of an obscure game, but ever since I first set my eyes on Banquet for Fools, it became one of my most anticipated games in a while. The gorgeous and unique claymation-looking art style was enough to get me interested, but the game is also a party-based RPG, and I absolutely love those. It has been in early access for a good while now, but I've been avoiding it until the full release so I could get the full experience. So, is the game any good, and does it live up to my expectations? Well, let's find out. What can I say? cRPG fans have been eating well lately. In my, subjective of course, opinion, the golden age of cRPGs was in the late 90s and maybe early 2000s, with widely beloved games like Baldur's Gate, Might and Magic, Fallout, and many others. After that, the genre stagnated a little. There would of course be some releases, but the major focus shifted towards more streamlined, action-oriented games for consoles, instead of math-crunching quests for the PC. In the last several years there have been some breakthroughs in the cRPG genre again. The unlikely hit that is Disco Elysium approached the genre from a very unique perspective, focusing heavily on the writing and ditching combat, one of the main activities in cRPGs, altogether, and it sparked an entire wave of copycats. Baldur's Gate 3, while not as innovative, is an extremely well done game that brought cRPGs back into the mainstream. In comparison to the other recent games in the genre, Banquet for Fools is likely the most creative cRPG in years. It's designed in a very unique and uncompromising way both in terms of mechanics and presentation, which is likely only possible by a very small team. Without knowing anything about the game, I expected Banquet for Fools to be one of those artsy games that go all out in the presentation, but leave the game relatively simple. I have nothing against that. Hylix 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. Its presentation is simply stunning, yet the gameplay is pretty much your typical RPG Maker ordeal. I know the second game is not made in RPG Maker, but it kept all the same principles. I thought Banquet for Fools would be something like that, but its distinct and creative look wasn't a compromise for simplified gameplay. Far from it. In fact, it's a long and complex systems-driven game that evoked that feeling of late 90s cRPGs like nothing else. It has a lot of those old-school design principles, no hand-holding, and instead of using your typical D&D system, it would have its own original rule set that would bring me back to those times where I had to learn the complex systems through exploration and experimentation. The main gist of the game is that you're on Invimona, a mostly uninhabited island full of wildlife and strange creatures. The island has recently been settled by some people from the mainland, and all the little colonies are diligently preparing for the harvest season, which is a matter of survival for them. One of the settlements, Jankbaron, has mysteriously vanished completely, so the player takes control of 4 volunteer guards tasked to investigate the disappearance of an entire village. First things first, the character creation. You get to create a party of 4 and choose from 5 possible unique races. The differences are mostly cosmetic, some might have chicken feet, some might be cave dwellers with moth wings that are sensitive to the sun, and so on. While the differences are mostly cosmetic, each race has slightly different starting stats that might make them more suitable to certain classes. But anyone can be anything really, with the exception of Yetis, these huge horny guys. They can be proficient spellcasters or warriors, but their large hands prevent them from using most smaller weapons, including all ranged weapons, but instead they can dual-wield two-handers. I found it pretty interesting how the gender is a slider in this game instead of a binary switch, and it also affects the character's weight somewhat. When it comes to skills and stats, it's a bona fide 90s experience. This game has this thing common to older RPGs, where you get to choose between many possible skills, but cannot really know which ones will be useful until you actually play the game. And in my experience with these kind of games, there's almost always 1 or 2 skills that are essential, and it can make or break the game depending on whether you invested in those skills or not. To make things slightly smoother, there are some pre-made party compositions, with the balanced one being the recommended one. But I'm no chump, I love customizing my own characters, so let's see what we've got. There are a lot of weapon skills to choose from, and I'm really glad that all of them behave differently. They have different attack speeds, range, swinging patterns and so on. Lighter one-handed weapons are faster, but have a low reach, while two-handed ones hit harder and have a higher chance to knock enemies down, while being slower to use. Blunt weapons can deal with armor better. There's a fair amount of not really typical choices. I'm really glad this game has spears. It's one of the most common and practical ancient weapons, but for whatever reason it's rarely included in games. Whips are pretty unusual. I haven't tried them, but they seem to have a long range, so they're pretty much a single-handed alternative to spears. When it comes to ranged weapons, aside from your usual bows, there are slings. I've seen those in action live, and they're pretty cool. Simple to make, but seemingly tricky to use. Or even more unusually, you can throw elixirs. All of the ranged weapons require ammunition that you either have to craft or buy. I find it pretty hilarious how instead of rocks you can throw frogs using slings.
Frog-based warfare.
I always find collecting frogs in the wild a little funny. I could use this frog, it's pretty much this game's "my legs are okay." There's even a completely viable unarmed option. Then there are several shield and armor skills, and obviously the heavier the armor, the stronger the defense, but it makes the wearer slower. Alternatively, robes don't do any of that, but instead they give bonuses to spellcasting stats. Not using armor at all is an option too, if you have enough agility to dodge attacks. Aside from equipment, there are all sorts of utility and spellcasting skills. One of the game's core themes is paganism, so the spells are all themed around different aspects of nature, which is extremely cool. And it's not typical elemental stuff like water or fire, it's a lot more specific stuff like vines and shrooms. You can summon those silly roly-polies or a bunch of exploding lizards, stuff like that. Intercession skill is pretty unique. It's pretty much an item enchanting skill, but you also need it to actually be able to use those enchanted items. Then there are multiple musical instrument skills. Those are for buffs and debuffs. And lastly, the rogue skills. Lockpicking, sneaking, and bartering. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. The stats are slightly different to your typical stuff. There's of course obvious stuff, like strength making you hit harder, but there's some more convoluted stuff, and the stats intertwine in all sorts of different calculations. For example, bow strength and agility can increase carry weight, but agility is more useful for quicker action speed. Instead of typical vitality to increase maximum health, there is aura, which also increases mental resilience and spell potency. Essentially, you want to first decide what gear or skills you want to use, and then pick stats to complement those choices. You really need to read these skill descriptions, because the required stats might be different from what you expect. For example, bows require strength. I love that Banquet for Fools breaks the RPG stereotype that bows are dexterity-based weapons, because it's actually a strongman's weapon in reality. Pulling a longbow string is no joke. Meanwhile, it's stuff like swords that require more dexterity, because you want to be quick and precise when fighting up close. Some weapons are more complicated to use and require more different stats, so some of them are better suited to a pure fighter who can afford to train for just that. While, let's say, a spellcaster might want something more simple, like a club or elixirs. Some skills can have pretty good synergies when it comes to stats. For example, musical instruments needs dexterity and sensory stats, and that works well for spears. I'll get deeper into character leveling and progression later, but there are games that allow you to mold your characters in all sorts of directions as you play, and Banquet for Fools is absolutely not one of them. Character creation is the single most important part of character building. With Banquet for Fools being a pretty abrasive 90s style experience, it also allows you to actually mess up your builds. Modern players accustomed to all sorts of quality of life features might hate that, but I am pretty much accustomed to this experience in cRPGs, where my first party of characters is essentially a test run to see what works and what doesn't. I enjoy character building and I see it as a part of the game. Either re-roll into something that works better, or roll with the punches. You might need to get into a certain mindset for it, but it can be very enjoyable to experiment with different party compositions and discover all sorts of synergies and how they change the gameplay. For my first go at the game I went with relatively simple choices, but then I saw someone make a full summoner build and it looked mind-blowing. So, did I mess up my initial party? Absolutely. I tried making a balanced party. I had a tanky fighter, a rogue wielding a sling, a dedicated pagan, that's how spellcasters are called in this, and being conditioned by those old school games, I made one guy focus entirely on utility skills, because I was afraid to miss out on something. I had also given every character an armor skill, because I love collecting different outfits in games. My first mistake was giving weapon skills to only 2 characters in hopes that I could use weapons regardless. Firstly, gear has all sorts of negative effects if the character is not proficient using it. But secondly, the starting gear depends on the chosen skills, so you only get a weapon if you're skilled in it. My second mistake was spending my limited starting funds on armor. Well, yeah, defense is good, but being able to defeat enemies is better. My 2 guards that had weapons were the ones dealing any damage. The combat is brutal in this game, so the melee fighter would get down quickly. The slingster would do good, but then I ran out of rocks to sling and had no money left to buy any more ammunition. Music instruments also worked differently than I expected. I thought my utility character would be a dedicated bard that just stays back and casts buffs like in usual RPGs, but in this game songs are not played manually. Instead they trigger upon completing certain conditions, like evading a certain amount of attacks or hitting enemies a certain amount of times. So you actually would want to give musical instruments as a secondary skill to a frontline fighter that will actually be hitting and evading enemies, making them like a sort of a paladin class. With me dealing very little damage and being absolutely bodied at every encounter, it was time to reroll. This time I knew what I wanted. I have some caveman tendencies and usually prefer melee fighters over spellcasters in RPGs, so I made a very melee focused party. My initial party was spread a bit thin, and you really want your characters to be specialized in just a few skills. You see these dots? You only get 3 of those to invest in skills and stats respectively. 2 golden ones for the main focus and a silver one for supporting skills and stats. You want things to complement each other as best as possible. Still, I made some characters focus on several things, making a sacrifice on the armor skills, and you'll definitely hear about that later. The guy I played as the most was pretty much a pure dual axe fighter, but since he had a high sensory stat, he also had a bartering skill. I gave my Yeti a flute and a spear, and that worked out pretty well. He was also the lockpicking guy. Arrows are the easiest to craft out of ranged ammunition, so I gave my ranger a bow as well as a short sword, because I became paranoid of the limited ammo. And in a bit of an odd choice, I made my only spellcaster wear the heaviest armor and a big heavy scepter that is excellent for breaking armor. He ended up being really slow. This party still had its own flaws, and ironing them out was rough, but the game suddenly became playable. And so, were there any essential skills like in those old school RPGs? Well, I'd say lockpicking is useful. You can potentially break open locks with a really heavy stick though.
What's your favorite job?
Crushing up boxes.
Crushing up boxes?
Yeah.
There is at least one optional quest that requires intercessions to complete. I say you should put a gold point into at least one rogue skill for a high sensory character, because it's a bit weird how detecting secrets works. I thought it would be mostly based on the sensory stat, but instead it's the highest rogue skill that contributes the most. I don't quite get how being good at bartering helps discover hidden paths, but oh well. You'll need a vine rug spell to access some areas, but you don't actually need to invest points in vines to be able to cast it. Other than that, I think there's little that's make or break. Phew, that was a lot of technical talk. This game looks absolutely beautiful, so let's talk about that for now. The visual style is utterly stunning, and unlike anything else I've seen before. It has this specific claymation look, and I love that stuff. But I know it isn't, and it just blows my mind. I have no clue what has been done to the visuals for them to look like claymation. I guess there's something about the texturing and the way things are shaped. My eyes had gotten accustomed to that look throughout the regular gameplay and kind of stopped seeing it, but it's very striking in any cinematics, close-ups and different camera angles. I think that's why I fell in love with the trailer so much. The great majority of the game is shown from a top-down perspective, but there are certain locations with different, fixed camera angles reminiscent of old-school survival horror games that are wonderful to behold. There's also something so elegant about the way the game looks. The color palette is pretty soft, the shapes are fairly rounded. Elegance is not something I would commonly associate with an ancient pagan society, but it really works here. This game reminds me of Xenoclash in more ways than one. Visually it feels like a fairly similar, very nature and tribal oriented look, but if Xenoclash depicted an almost Stone Age society, Banquet for Fools is like a Bronze Age equivalent. It has slight vibes of the Odyssey, with the frequent sailing, the mythical encounters, and the way how some of the weapons would be reminiscent of what ancient Greeks might have used. At the same time, some designs, heavy armor especially, reminded me more of ancient Japan. It takes from various inspirations, but overall it's a very original blend of its own that feels cohesive overall. After seeing the trailer cinematics and the game in motion, I thought at first that the graphics would be fully 3D, but the backgrounds are actually pre-rendered, for better or for worse. Every scene would look distinct and detailed, and there's still a functioning lighting system, which always feels like magic to me when it comes to pre-rendered backgrounds. The action takes place on a single small island, so you're not going to see all your typical diverse biomes of snowy mountains and deserts and jungles, but despite it all being in the same climate and such, different parts still have subtle details that make them distinct from each other. The shade of the grass and rocks might be different, there might be a different variety of flora growing, some cliffs might be more jagged, while others are smoothed by the waves of the ocean. It all looks wild and untamed. The settlements look pretty crude and makeshift in comparison to the masonry of ancient ruins left by mysterious predecessors. I was pleasantly surprised by the main menu having an FMV still life scene. That was unexpected, but I love my mixed media. Even the settings menu is unique in this. To remap keybinds, you have to switch them around on an actual image of a keyboard. That's pretty creative. I like the concept and how it allows you to see what keybinds are taken at a glance, but it is a slightly flawed approach. I found that the Alt and Windows keys are switched for me in comparison to my keyboard's layout, and there might be similar issues with any less standard keyboards. I've had a few German QWERTZ keyboards before, that would already be a bit confusing despite the differences being pretty minimal, but god forbid one of those maniacs with a Dvorak keyboard displays this. The character designs are also lovely. I know statistically, tons of people think otherwise, but I find picking a human when different fantasy races are available incredibly boring and tend to go for the most unusual options. Banquet for Fools has no typical human race. It's all weird elf-like guys with unusual skin tones. I would find it a bit odd at first how despite being warriors, everyone is pretty lean, but it makes sense in terms of lore, because eating meat would be cursed or something along those lines, so everyone would be a vegetarian. I'm not into uniforms in real life, but I found it nice here to see how they represent the culture and differences between the different settlements. I found it pretty interesting how every single hairstyle would be long. That goes along with the society in the game overall being very naturalistic. Also, I guess the power fantasy of this game is that there's no male pattern balding. All of the enemies and wildlife would also be appropriately original. Out of the humanoids, there are these skilpy guys that look like some strange creatures of darkness. Some of the animals would be completely new and unseen before inventions. Even more generic creatures like spiders would look fairly unusual here. It's amazing that the game also encourages the player to be creative and artistic too, because whenever you create a spell, you need to name it and draw an icon for it yourself. You can also doodle whatever you want on the map, which is not only amusing, but also very handy. Banquet for Fools is also a game that remembers the art of beautiful UI. I'm no opponent of minimal UI that's pretty much invisible during gameplay, but I also loved when older games used to do more maximalist UI designs that are in tune with the world's aesthetic. Every piece of UI in Banquet for Fools looks really ornate and as if made out of clay and bronze. Despite being visually detailed, it strikes a good balance of not obscuring vision during gameplay or being distracting. The character screens are absolutely wonderful, with all the floral carvings and the little candles. I also love the inventory Tetris with all the unique pre-rendered sprites of items. A little side note, but I found it a bit odd how picked items would appear in the middle of the inventory instead of some orderly fashion. I guess that simulates the guards quickly tossing the thing into their bag and sorting it out later. There would be a variety of fonts used and none of them feel generic. Some more readable, some more crude or gothic. The fancier cursive ones were a bit unexpected to me, but all of them blend in well and contribute to the game's visual identity. I'm also a big fan of the dialogue screens, with the way they would incorporate all of the party members at once, and being able to choose between different answers from different guys. But also, I would like how it would all sound. It has that gibberish voice simulation to make do without actual voice acting, and with the way how detailed the UI is, it gave me flashbacks to the uncanniness of Wangers. That was a compliment, by the way. Speaking of sound, Banquet for Fools sounds just as unique as it looks. It has a fittingly soft but sort of uncanny quality to the music. For the most part, it sounds like it's played with the ancient instruments that would be used in the game's world. It would sound pretty chill and relaxing, especially the more wind instrument-based tracks. There would be tracks that are more string instrument focused, and while they're calm, they would have this slightly dissonant quality to them, if I'm using the term correctly. The battle themes would be appropriately more intense, but even those would sound soft with the oddball electronic percussion. It kind of reminded me of Adventure Time of all things. All tracks would have very few instruments playing at the same time, making them feel fairly minimal, but the rhythms and the melodies would be surprisingly memorable. Some of the themes would get on my nerves a little though, for example when I would be stuck on a puzzle, or sailing past enemies that keep chasing me and instigating the battle theme. Sorry, but the naval combat sucked, at least for a melee focused party, so I was avoiding it whenever possible. Me getting irritated might be a side effect of me binging the game for several weeks straight though. There's also this bizarre synth sample that plays when you get ambushed or succeed a sensory check that sounds so harsh. It's the kind of sound I would be afraid of as a kid. Windows XP error jumpscare vibes. Overall, the sound is equal parts beautiful and bizarre, and I wouldn't want it any other way. If anything, it's a kind of sound I wouldn't mind doing myself. I would absolutely love to be a part of something as captivating as this, and while the music I typically make is pretty different, I would be willing to attempt creating such strange folk sounds, because I think it's not too far from my philosophy despite a different genre. Devs, if you're watching and you're ever making a sequel, I am available. Okay, let's get to the actual adventuring. Banquet for Fools is a game with a complete lack of handholding, and the player really has to think for themselves. That might sound daunting, but the game isn't impenetrable. Instead of having 4 tutorials, the game has a guide menu, explaining the most important elements of the game with lovely video examples. I actually like that system a lot, because I wouldn't be forced to go through all of it at once, and would only need to consult it when I got curious about how something specific works in the game. The game also doesn't have any map markers, journal, or auto notes. Instead, the player is able to take notes themselves, even in the middle of a dialogue, and I would highly encourage to do that regarding any information that feels even remotely important. I'm rarely a fan of this kind of thing, as I can easily forget stuff myself over a longer stretch of time. But that made me really pay attention to all the dialogues and notes regarding the things I should do and places I should go, and it would be more immersive for it. My experience with 90s cRPGs came in handy here, because this is one of those games where you really want to go talk with everyone you can, and I've already been trained to do that. There's no telling who might have a quest, or some interesting information, or who is a skill trainer, and it's very easy to miss things. I mean, I felt like I did pretty much everything there is in this game, but my final score was still a fair amount off from the maximum, so there were still things I managed to miss. And I must say, the quests in this game are well thought and interesting. Well, there is the occasional simple quest where you just have to deliver an item or kill some monster, but the great majority of them are a lot more unique and convoluted. There might be a magical frog you have to find by going around and yelling its name, a thievery you need to find proof of. There is an outlawed romance between different species that you need to investigate and decide the outcome of. Overall, all your party is adorned in guard uniforms. They're pretty much ancient cops. Their duty is to help citizens with their trouble and apprehend any felons. I found the IRS system pretty interesting. On one hand, I sometimes find it a bit dissonant how bloodthirsty heroes in video games typically are, killing everyone in their path. In this game you have the alternative to just knock criminals out and turn them in to authorities. That's actually the standard procedure, because you get paid for that. But on the other hand, there's room for questioning such a system. There might be some people who are better off dead. But more importantly, the punishment for all crimes is the same. All criminals get sent to the exile island. It doesn't matter if they murder multiple people or just nick some small trinkets. There are cases where the crimes really feel insignificant, but the player gets conditioned to play the cop role and get paid for any apprehended felons. With this kind of system, you might quickly see yourself become abusive of your given authority.
I'm a cop, and you will respect my authority! Oh! Get your ass to jail!
It's pretty interesting how, despite the elegant and charming presentation of the game, there's some pretty dark stuff going on, like illegal drug trade, murders, children getting possessed, and so on. You can easily see your party actually become pretty corrupt cops, dealing in contraband and bribes, because that stuff pays even better than arresting the criminals. And money is pretty scarce in this game. You might be able to find some pretty decent weapons in the wild, but the same doesn't go for armor. My inner loot goblin was a little disappointed by the fairly small variety of gear there is to find in this game, but most of the best equipment you have to actually buy. Throughout the whole game, I had only found several suits of armor while adventuring, and all of them would be the heavy stonewood armor, so it wasn't useful to everyone. It does make money feel really valuable instead, which is refreshing, because I had gotten too accustomed to finding everything I need while adventuring, and money being virtually useless. Aside from gear, you also need to buy ammunition and healing items. There are food items that grant various buffs, but they spoil in several days, so you can't keep them forever. The rest of the healing consumables are various kinds of alcohol, so it's not uncommon in this game to be on a strict alcohol diet. Also, when it comes to equipment, I found it interesting how small all the stat numbers were kept for all the items, especially with the amount of math going on in this game. But that would make every single change really count. I just wish so badly there was a wider variety of items, at least in terms of cosmetics. I understand the uniforms, but why can't I have the kick-ass mushroom head like that guy in the intro? I would kill for that. Or the different kinds of armor in the same tier would generally be just recolors. That's a little disappointing, but at least I can sympathize with armor being a lot of work to model and animate. There are quite a few puzzles in the game, and they actually require you to use your brain. It's far from something like Skyrim having the solution right next to the puzzle. I guess part of the complexity is the game not really telling how the puzzles work mechanically, and you having to figure it out. You might need to utilize inventory in ways you don't quite expect, or check the numbers in the deeper menus for nerds. I'd say the game requires you to think outside the box, but it's actually the opposite. You need to learn to think inside the box. It's just a pretty specific box with a lot of different compartments that you need to figure out. There would be quite a few times where I would feel quite stumped by a puzzle, but upon reaching the solution, I would think that it actually made a lot of sense, and I would feel a little stupid for not realizing sooner. Every little mechanic in this game really has a purpose. I'm not gonna lie though, there were occasions that actually did annoy me. For example, there would be this one puzzle that I felt like I should have had the answer for in a scroll I had. I kept rereading it and it had no useful info in it. I even rewatched my footage to confirm a character saying that they marked the steps to the puzzle in the scroll, yet there was nothing useful. Only after being told by someone else I noticed that the answer was written in the item description instead of the actual scroll, and I just never thought about looking at that. The reason for that is that apparently the answer is randomly generated for every playthrough, and the scrolls are actually pre-rendered images. I mean, it's some really nice images, and I think some of them, if not all, might have actually been written or drawn on real parchments, but that's still a pretty confusing way to do things. So, while the puzzles were varied and had thought behind them, not all of them were exactly intuitive due to the amount of things that are possible in the game and it being difficult to tell which features the player would need to engage with. All that thinking is going to make my brain overheat, so let's vent and talk about the combat instead. Banquet for Fools has a combat system that I've never seen before, and it really feels innovative in the cRPG genre. Typically, in party-based games, you have either fully turn-based combat, which is usually my preferred option, or real-time with pause, which I'm generally not a fan of, because it feels like I have either too little control or have to micromanage everything too much. Banquet for Fools is neither of those, but it leans closer to real-time with pause. All the movement, positioning and dodging is happening in real time. You control one character at a time, and the rest of your party is controlled by pretty decent and customizable AI. The way you do things is you have this sort of global cooldown bar that you have to wait until it charges, and then you can pause the game to perform an action. When you pause, you get this dome that represents your reach. If there is an enemy inside it, you can hit, kick, charge or do whatever. It sounds pretty simple, but there are a lot of nuances. Positioning matters a lot. You might not want to get surrounded by multiple enemies, yet if you see a clump of foes, you can hit multiple of them in a single strike. Fallen enemies are not able to evade, so you might want to prioritize them and finding all sorts of ways to knock them over. Manually dodging attacks is very handy. Different classes play significantly differently too. As I said, I'm a bit of a caveman, so I mostly control my dual axe guy because he could swing fast and do a lot of damage up close without needing to think much, but I would constantly have to be moving and dodging. Meanwhile, ranged characters or spellcasters might feel more relaxed staying back, watching all the other guys do the dirty work while they provide support from further away. I definitely found longer range weapons like spears or bows very handy in some tougher situations, where my character would be the last one standing and I would desperately need to survive by slowly kiting enemies around. While I loved my axe guy, he would be at constant risk of being hit because of his short reach. Now that you understand the gameplay and combat better, I can quickly interject about the leveling system. While stats matter, skills are king in Banquet for Fools. You can generally improve 3 skills each level, but the skills a character uses the most get bonus points. So a skill would normally get just 1 point per level, but the most frequently used ones would be upgraded by up to 4 points, which is a significant difference. So you really want to think about how you spend those points and what skills you use. A skill is considered proficient at 60 points, so you need to increase it a lot before it becomes viable. Thankfully, if a weak skill is among the most frequently used ones, it receives huge bonuses and can be leveled a lot faster, so it's possible to catch up to the main ones. That being said, some skills are a lot harder to train than others. Weapons are easy, you're going to use them all the time. Same goes for music or spells. Now, remember when I said I didn't invest into armor with my new party, yet it was melee focused, so I really wanted to use armor? That ended up being a huge pain. Most of my characters lacked in agility too, so they weren't good at evading attacks. So my dudes would be quite squishy and I would have to backtrack to towns and heal a lot. Now you would think that if I just equipped armor, it would be used in every fight, right? Well, it wasn't so simple. To increase an armor skill, a character needs to get hit, yet it's preferable to dodge. Weapon skills get used a lot more, so they're pretty much always at the top. My musician guy had songs activating at the start of a fight, so his music skill was constantly high up. Skills like lockpicking or bartering are used a lot less frequently. To counteract that, there's a lot more weight to them, so those two tend to outweigh armor skills when used. So very rarely I got to use the low-level skill training bonuses. The alternative was to use skill trainers and upgrade the skills in exchange for money, and that's what I ended up doing, but my god was it expensive. Every upgrade cost twice the amount of skill in emeralds, so the prices really ramp up. Training a higher level skill is straight up stupid. The amount of money you can get in the game is very finite, and I was constantly broke from training the armor skills. I was able to get proficient in armor skills by around level 12. 12! That's pretty much halfway into the game. That meant that I was also suffering penalties from wearing armor I'm not proficient at this whole time. Also I planned to train my flute playing yet in both a shield and medium armor, but I ended up giving up on the armor and leaving just the shield, because frankly it became quite ridiculous. Also there's a catch to leveling something like lockpicking. There's a limited amount of locks to unlock in the game, so if you don't increase it early on, it can become really rough later in the game. So yeah, you really have to plan your characters from the very start. Anyway, I haven't gotten to the best part of the combat yet. Your party are just regular guys. They don't really have some special powers, but they have each other. As you level up, you can learn new techniques that are mostly focused on teamwork. So really, the real leveling are the friends we made along the way. Seriously though, these techniques completely change the flow of the game. You start with pretty basic moves, like kicking or charging to knock enemies down. An absolutely essential pick is rally. I was avoiding it for too long, because due to the name, it sounded like it would be some inspirational buff or something, but it actually unlocks power strikes that deal a lot more damage. Also the animations for them are sick. Throughout the fight you can accumulate up to 3 rally points that are shown as these golden medal things at the bottom right corner, and use them to unleash the most powerful attacks that have a little QTE thing that you have to time well to do as much damage as possible. As you branch out in the techniques tree, you unlock progressively more complicated maneuvers like picking up an enemy and spinning them around to hit other foes. Or I found kick pummeling really amusing, very cop-like. It would require a rally point to perform though, so a regular rally attack using a weapon would still be generally stronger. Overall, you get a lot of opportunities to tag team with your buddies and get a bunch of free hits in, regardless of your cooldown, like kicking fallen enemies and such. If you upgrade your rally attacks enough, you can have up to 3 guys perform them at once, unleashing a devastating amount of damage in an instant. It would be less like regular fighting and more like tactical brawling. Brawling is really the best way to describe it. There are all sorts of moves that are reminiscent of wrestling or street fighting. The dudes really fight for their lives with everything at their disposal. This is another reason why this game reminds me of Xenoclash, especially the second game that had multiple main characters who would tag team in brawls. Yet instead of being an action game, Banquet for Fools is a top-down tactical experience, and it's unlike anything else I've seen. Some upgrades had more of a support role, for example being able to revive team members more often and with more health. That was extremely useful, and since I was too broke to buy healing items, it was often better to fall in a fight and get revived to restore health. I call it tactical mid-fight nap. A major tactic that didn't quite click for me was making a formation. You can make your team group up in a single spot to gain some evasion buffs and such. I've heard people say that it's extremely useful, but it wasn't in my experience. I guess it can be handy on some choke points, but generally I felt like grouping up and staying in place sacrificed all my mobility and just made me an easier target. That might have been because I had mostly close range fighters, I don't know. I would love to know how to utilize this better, because I feel like I'm not getting something and I'm missing out. I also love the importance of different classes and their uses in encounters. My fighter team would be pretty great at breaking enemy lines and dishing out damage, but with my only spellcaster lagging crowd control spells, I would be in a lot of trouble when having to fight a group of ranged enemies, or even worse, I would be absolutely screwed against enemies that could root me in place. But yeah, it might feel unusual and tough to get into at first for some, but I absolutely love the combat. It's very original, and it really gives the game a reason to be party-based due to how all the characters synergize and complement each other. Well, yeah, different classes would also have their roles in similar games and would cover for each other's weaknesses, but it would feel more like they're all doing their thing individually while being in a team. Meanwhile, in Banquet for Fools, it feels like all the team members really interact with one another. They're doing these maneuvers as a team. They would hold down enemies so a friend could get a better shot, coordinate their strikes together, protect one another from getting hit, and so on. I feel like this kind of system could be expanded even further with even more in-depth teamwork and character synergies, as well as a wider variety of brawling moves. But this is the first time I've seen something like this, so it's commendable for that alone. The character creation and development, as well as the combat, are all very important parts of a cRPG, but in my opinion, it's the general adventuring and exploration that is the meat of this game. The game's world might not be the largest there is, but it's very detailed and lovingly crafted. The map is divided into several smaller regions, and each one of them would have some points of interest to explore and secrets to find. I was even finding new things to do in the very first zone until the very end game, because it's that easy to miss something. And the player is given complete freedom to explore the world in any order. That is, of course, if they can deal with the enemies. There is no level scaling and some fights can get really brutal. I would say that Banquet for Fools is a fairly difficult game, but it's difficult in a way I enjoy. Instead of having to learn enemy movesets and carefully time all actions, this game is based more around the knowledge of systems and tactics. And if a fight seems too hard even with a decent approach, you can always go somewhere else to get stronger and return for another round. Well, most of the time anyway. There are a few occasions where you can get locked in an area, and if you're not prepared for it, you might need to reload. So, save often. The overall exploration is a joy in this game. You can find all sorts of hidden treasure or even solutions to various quests before you even accept the task. As I said, all of the quests are quite interesting, but the rewards are really worth it too, because aside from just item or monetary rewards, the entire party can get permanent increases in certain stats or skills.
Aura increase.
There are plenty of fun little details to discover in this game, like the fact that petting cats gives you a buff. GOTY 2026. Or it took me a good while to notice, but Spirit for spellcasting is mainly regenerated by killing things. That included tiny bugs, so stomping every single one along the way becomes like an unintentional minigame. I guess in this game you can tell pagans apart from their feet constantly being covered in goo. Just be careful not to slip like that one grape stomping lady.
On a whole day. Stop!
Getting context for selling contraband can be quite tricky, especially for enforcers of the law, so you really need to be inquisitive in order to be successful. It's pretty funny how despite all the shady dealings, you can still become some kids' role models. The game really opens up when you unlock the boat. Yes, it's helpful to have different means of traversal available, but it's not that much faster. What's more important is that together with the boat, you get a boro, this strange deer-sheep looking pet that acts as a pack animal. It allows you to carry so many more items without returning to town. You can get different borrows throughout the game, and they impact the sailing speed, strangely enough. They don't really do anything in the boat aside from just standing there, so I ended up with the conclusion that it's their constant stream of force that propels the boat. Can that be considered an eco-friendly engine? Yet, it's the exploration and open-endedness of the game that I feel a little conflicted about. The first portion of the game is like the honeymoon period. You get two clear objectives: go to the lighthouse to retrieve a boat, and go to investigate the Jankbarons. The directions are fairly vague and it's easy to get lost, but it's still enjoyable to explore and find various things along the way. You might end up free roaming and sidetracking a lot, but it's nice to have a specific goal in mind. After Jankbarons, the main quest becomes a lot more vague, and the player is left without any clear directions, and just has to explore the rest of the island. Since the launch of the game, a feature has been added where you can type help, and the party members would remind you of the current goal, but the only tip I got throughout the entire game was that I should visit the other towns. That's not very helpful, especially in the late game, when you already explored the majority of the map. In a way, I understand why it was done this way. There is a lot of vagueness in the game, and it requires the player to be inquisitive. Exploration and discovery is the main point. There are plenty of specific names and terms in the game that don't really get explained. You can make some of them out from context as you play, but it's still very easy to get confused by them. Sovereign Syndicate had a pretty nice system where you could mouse over a more complicated term to get a definition, but I'm not sure if it would work in this game, because the mystery is part of the whole idea. The game is meant to feel somewhat cryptic, and the culture a little alien. The exploration is a similar deal. The game has multiple endings, and the best one is the reward for the most thorough exploration, so it would make little sense to just reveal all the secrets of what needs to be done. Yet at the same time it would make me feel less like I'm investigating something in particular or reaching for a specific goal, and more like I'm wandering aimlessly and doing whatever quest I find just for the sake of it. In hindsight, it does make some sense. Your duty as guards is not to just investigate the disappearance of Jankbarons, but help the citizens however you can. The harvest is coming, and its yield will affect everyone. After all, there needs to be a banquet, and there are plenty of fools who can't solve their problems themselves. Still, the game would be really non-linear, and it would be very difficult to tell how any of the main quests and plot threads relate to one another until the very end. A lot of the time I felt like I was just grasping at straws. I'm quite used to always having a clear objective these days, and often I felt genuinely lost. You could argue that 90s cRPGs could also be obscure and confusing, and I don't disagree with that. It's just that I would be playing them well after the fact and could easily consult guides online. I've been playing Banquet for Fools right after the 1.0 release, and there were no guides or walkthroughs whatsoever. Big shout out to the game's Discord server. I might have been able to finish the game without it, but it would have taken a lot longer. And people there would understand the importance of discovery, so they would keep spoilers to a minimum. A lot of the puzzles in the game would be contained to a single area, so it wouldn't be too bad, but you would really need to explore every nook and cranny. Meanwhile, some bigger quests will have you backtracking through the entire island. At times it felt a bit like one of those confusing point-and-click games, where you have to try anything on everything. I can enjoy such games, but they can get really frustrating when you get stuck. With Banquet for Fools' world being as intricate as it is, it can be easy to miss or even misunderstand things you know you should be looking for. Your experience might differ if you're playing this game a bit later, but I guess I got the authentic 90s experience of not having a clue what's going on half of the time and having to slowly piece things together on my own. If there was one thing I could change, I guess it would be the writing. I think maybe if it was a little tighter, got the player a bit more invested in the story and characters instead of being quite vague, and just provided a little more direction, it could outweigh the deliberately cryptic challenges, and it would genuinely be a 10 out of 10 game in my opinion. Even with the flaws, I'm very happy with the game, and I enjoy Banquet for Fools thoroughly. Some of these old school cRPGs would be among my all-time favorite games that I would gladly replay, and I'm happy to be able to add a fresh game to the list that doesn't lack anything the Grace of Old had. What's the most impressive is that the game is made by just 2 people, and it's a couple too. That's pretty much the dream for me. If I didn't know better, I would think it's a really good AA production, but I guess that middle tier of games is kind of dead these days. It's amazing that the game is both absolutely beautiful in the artistic sense, but also intricate in terms of mechanics. It's quite a long game too. It's not compromising on anything. And I guess the small team helped every aspect of the game feel really cohesive. All the mechanics, game design, artistic choices, and the way the game is written would all complement each other. It's hard to separate these aspects from one another, because they feel so interconnected, and it ultimately helps the game be incredibly immersive. Another thing that I have nothing but respect for is how tirelessly the developers have been working at creating patches for the game to make the player's experience as smooth as possible. They would actively listen to the player's feedback, and while I was playing, I would see them release even multiple patches in a single day. There are kinks in the game, and they keep getting ironed out. Even some new features are being added, so some of my complaints might be dealt with by the time you play the game. There are some things I personally wish the devs would remain firm on. For example, quite a few people are asking for a chance to respec characters, but I think it would lessen the importance of choices during character creation if you could just easily optimize your party. Besides, for me, the most interesting part of replaying such games is trying out different party compositions, and there would be less reason to do that if I could just switch my skill sets anytime in a single playthrough. I understand the importance of accessibility too, but at some point a choice on the intended design needs to be made. But that's just my 2 cents. Also, apparently the game is going to receive new game modes in the future, so there's stuff to look forward to. There's still plenty of work left, but I wish Hannah and Joseph some well-deserved rest after this. I can hardly imagine how intense a game launch must be, and they've been really going at it. I wish the game itself success too, because it's a wonderful experience. Banquet for Fools is a beautiful and complex game that has its own unique rules, yet at the same time it respects the player's intelligence and trusts their ability to solve the game's mystery. I've been Jankbaron. I really enjoyed playing this game, and I hope you enjoyed this video too. You can support my channel monetarily by donating to my Ko-fi page. Every little bit helps. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video.